The world watches with bated breath, eyes glued to screens and ears tuned to the latest updates. As tensions between major global powers escalate, the atmosphere is thick with uncertainty and fear. The spectre of a potential Third World War looms large, sparking fears and anxiety across the globe. The conflict in Ukraine, ignited by Russia's incursion, has become a tinderbox, a flashpoint that threatens to ignite a larger conflagration. With the United States and its allies providing substantial military aid to Ukraine, including advanced weaponry, the stakes have never been higher. This decision, spearheaded by President Biden, has been lauded by some as a necessary step to counter Russian aggression and defend democracy. They argue that standing firm against tyranny is essential to maintaining global stability. However, others view it as a dangerous escalation that risks dragging the world into a wider conflict. The debate rages on, with passionate arguments on both sides. The spectre of a global conflagration, once a distant nightmare, now looms large in the collective consciousness. The memories of World War I and II serve as stark reminders of the devastation that such conflicts can bring. The stakes could not be higher, with the potential for catastrophic consequences that extend far beyond the borders of Ukraine. The threat of nuclear warfare adds an even more terrifying dimension to the crisis. The world stands at a precipice, grappling with the question of whether history is doomed to repeat itself. Are we on the brink of another devastating global conflict, or can we learn from the past and chart a different course? The answer lies in the hands of world leaders and diplomats who must navigate these treacherous waters with wisdom and restraint. The hope is that diplomacy and restraint can avert disaster, and that the world can step back from the edge of the abyss. Ultimately, the desire for peace and stability is universal. People around the world yearn for a future where their children can grow up in safety, free from the shadow of war. It is this shared hope that must guide our actions in these uncertain times. As the world watches and waits, the choices made in the coming days and weeks will shape the course of history. Let us hope that those choices lead us towards a brighter, more peaceful future. The echoes of the past, particularly the lead-up to the two world wars, reverberate ominously in the present. The lessons of history, often learned at great cost, seem to be fading from collective memory, leaving us vulnerable to repeating the same mistakes. As we navigate the complexities of today's geopolitical landscape, it is crucial to remember the events that shaped the 20th century and the devastating consequences that followed. The complex web of alliances, the rise of nationalism, and the perils of miscalculation that characterized those tumultuous periods bear striking resemblance to the current geopolitical landscape. In the early 20th century, Europe was a powder keg of competing interests and fragile alliances, each nation wary of the other's intentions. Today we see a similar pattern emerging, with nations forming strategic partnerships and alliances to counter perceived threats. The delicate balance of power is once again at risk of tipping into chaos. The world is once again confronted with the daunting task of navigating a treacherous path fraught with danger and uncertainty. The scars of past conflicts are still visible in many parts of the world, serving as a stark reminder of the human cost of war. As we face new challenges, from territorial disputes to economic rivalries, the stakes have never been higher. The decisions made by world leaders in the coming months will have far-reaching consequences, not just for their own nations, but for the entire global community. As we stand at this critical juncture, it is imperative to approach the situation with a clear-eyed assessment of the risks and a steadfast commitment to peaceful resolution. Diplomacy must be our first and foremost tool, as the alternative is too dire to contemplate. The lessons of the past teach us that war is not an inevitability, but a failure of diplomacy and communication. By fostering dialogue and understanding, we can work towards a future where conflicts are resolved without bloodshed. The fate of the world may very well hinge on the choices made in the coming days, weeks, and months. Every statement, every action, and every decision carries weight and can either bring us closer to peace or push us further towards conflict. The global community is watching with bated breath, hoping that our leaders will rise to the occasion and steer us away from the brink. The responsibility is immense, and the consequences of failure are too grave to ignore. The world is watching, hoping against hope that cooler heads will prevail and that the spectre of global war can be averted. The voices of ordinary people calling for peace and stability must not be drowned out by the drums of war. It is a reminder that the true cost of conflict is borne by those who have the least to do with its causes. As we navigate these turbulent times, it is essential to keep the human element at the forefront of our minds and strive for solutions that prioritize the well-being of all. The parallels between the current geopolitical climate and the prelude to the two world wars are stark and unsettling. The same forces that drove nations to the brink of destruction a century ago are once again at play. Nationalism, militarism, and a sense of inevitable conflict arising, creating an atmosphere of tension and mistrust. It is a sobering reminder that history has a way of repeating itself if we do not learn from its lessons. Just as the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo in 1914 ignited the tinderbox of European tensions, so too has the conflict in Ukraine inflamed existing rivalries and mistrust between Russia and the West. The echoes of that fateful event are heard in the rhetoric and actions of today's leaders as they navigate a complex and dangerous geopolitical landscape. The stakes are high, and the potential for miscalculation is ever present. The intricate web of alliances that bound nations together in the early 20th century, ultimately dragging them into the abyss of war, finds its modern-day equivalent in organizations like NATO. These alliances, while intended to provide security and stability, can also create a sense of inevitability about conflict. The mutual defense pacts that bind nations together can act as a double-edged sword, deterring aggression on one hand, but also escalating tensions on the other. While designed to deter aggression and maintain peace, such alliances can also inadvertently escalate conflicts, as seen in the current crisis. The presence of military forces and the constant readiness for conflict can create a hair-trigger situation where a single misstep could lead to a full-scale war. It is a delicate balance, and one that requires careful management and a commitment to de-escalation. The rise of nationalism, a potent force in the lead-up to both world wars, is once again rearing its head in various parts of the world. This resurgence of nationalistic sentiment, often accompanied by a rejection of global cooperation and a disdain for international norms, further complicates an already volatile situation. The rhetoric of us versus them creates divisions and fosters an environment where conflict becomes more likely. This resurgence of nationalistic sentiment, often accompanied by a rejection of global cooperation and a disdain for international norms, further complicates an already volatile situation. The challenges we face today, from climate change to economic inequality, require a collective response. Yet, the rise of nationalism threatens to undermine the very institutions and agreements that have been put in place to address these global issues. Perhaps the most disconcerting parallel lies in the risk of miscalculation. In the lead-up to both world wars, a series of misjudgments and misunderstandings set the stage for conflict. Leaders overestimated their own strength and underestimated the resolve of their adversaries, leading to a catastrophic chain of events. Today, the risk of miscalculation is just as high, if not higher, given the complexity and interconnectedness of the modern world. Just as misjudgments and misinterpretations of intentions played a significant role in the outbreak of both world wars, so too does the potential for miscalculation cast a long shadow over the current crisis. The stakes are higher than ever, with advanced technology and nuclear weapons adding a new layer of danger. The margin for error is slim, and the consequences of a misstep could be catastrophic. In a world of high-stakes brinkmanship and complex geopolitical maneuvering, the margin for error has shrunk considerably. The need for clear communication, mutual understanding, and a commitment to peaceful resolution has never been more critical. As we navigate these uncertain times, it is essential to remember the lessons of the past and strive to build a future where peace and cooperation prevail over conflict and division. President Biden's decision to supply Ukraine with advanced weaponry represents a high-stakes gamble, one that carries both potential benefits and significant risks. The move is seen as a bold statement of support for Ukraine, a country that has been under siege since the annexation of Crimea in 2014 and the ongoing conflict in the Donbas region. Proponents of the move argue that it is essential to provide Ukraine with the means to defend itself against Russian aggression, which has shown no signs of abating. They believe that a well-armed Ukraine can serve as a formidable deterrent to further Russian advances, deterring further encroachment and sending a clear message that the West stands firmly behind Ukraine's sovereignty. This stance is not just about military might, but also about moral support, showing that democratic nations will not stand idly by while an independent country is threatened. They contend that failing to provide sufficient military support would embolden Russia, potentially leading to further expansionism and destabilizing the entire region. The fear is that a passive response could encourage Russia to test the resolve of other neighboring countries, thereby igniting a broader conflict. The stakes are high, and the implications of inaction could be severe. Proponents argue that the cost of not acting could be far greater than the risks associated with arming Ukraine. They see this as a pivotal moment in the defense of international norms and the preservation of global stability. Arming Ukraine, they argue, is not just about protecting one country, but about upholding a rules-based international order and defending the principle of territorial integrity. This principle is a cornerstone of international law and is vital for maintaining peace and security worldwide. However, critics of the Biden administration's approach caution against the dangers of escalation. They argue that providing Ukraine with increasingly sophisticated weaponry could be perceived by Russia as a direct threat, potentially provoking a wider conflict. The fear is that this could lead to a dangerous spiral of escalation, with each side responding to the other's moves with increasing force. They argue that providing Ukraine with increasingly sophisticated weaponry could be perceived by Russia as a direct threat, potentially provoking a wider conflict. The introduction of advanced weaponry into the region could lead to an arms race, with both sides seeking to outdo the other in terms of military capability, potentially provoking a wider conflict. The consequences of such a conflict could be catastrophic, not just for Ukraine and Russia, but for the entire world. The risk of miscalculation or accidental escalation is ever present, and the potential for a full-scale war cannot be ignored. They warn that the line between providing defensive aid and actively fueling a war can be blurry, and that the United States risks being drawn deeper into a conflict with another nuclear-armed power. The complexities of modern warfare mean that even well-intentioned actions can have unintended consequences, and the potential for escalation is always a concern. And that the United States risks being drawn deeper into a conflict with another nuclear-armed power. The specter of nuclear confrontation looms large, and the stakes could not be higher. The potential for a misstep that could lead to a catastrophic outcome is a sobering reminder of the dangers inherent in this situation. This cautious perspective emphasizes the need for diplomacy and de-escalation, advocating for a negotiated settlement that addresses Russia's security concerns while respecting Ukraine's sovereignty. Diplomacy, they argue, is the only way to achieve a lasting peace and to prevent further bloodshed, advocating for a negotiated settlement that addresses Russia's security concerns while respecting Ukraine's sovereignty. The path to peace is fraught with challenges, but it is a path that must be pursued with determination and resolve. Only through dialogue and mutual understanding can a sustainable solution be found, one that ensures the security and prosperity of all nations involved.